Thank you for auditing the always positive new music review show hosted by a French professor who is frantically trying to finish his class on hip hop culture and rap music before it begins in less than 2 weeks. I'm doing pretty well. I think I have the entire outline of the class all set now, and I've created the first 2 weeks of classes. By that, I mean I have the reading, I have the homework, and I have the PowerPoints. I've already shared a couple with you. And I'm going to be sharing with you what I call the prehistory of rap music. Now, I've decided that I'm really going to lay into the idea of hip hop culture and rap music being distinct. And in order to do that, I'm going to treat 1979's release of Rapper's Delight as the beginning of history. I mean, literally the beginning of history, right? Because when we talk about prehistory, we're talking about like before things were written down, right? That's what prehistory is. It's not like people weren't there. There are people coming down from the trees and looking out of the savannah or whatever. They just weren't writing it down. History begins when things are recorded. So the prehistory really leads up until the point where rap music became commercially viable and became known to the world in 1979 and then 80, 81, 82, etc. So the first two classes after the introductory class, the introductory class, I'm going to sort of explain what is hip hop culture, what is rap music, that stuff. I'm going to be focusing on the prehistory. I'm going to be doing two classes. I'm going to share those with you right now. The first class is going to be about the Bronx in the 1970s. I do not think it can possibly be oversold how spectacularly amazing it is that the most dominant force in the world culturally right now came from the Bronx in the 1970s. It almost seems fake. It seems like it can't even be real, that a place that was literally the symbol, the shorthand for neglect, poverty, concentrated poverty, racism, urban decay, post-industrial misery, that the place that was the absolute epitome of the bottom of the bottom of the bottom of the bottom created this cultural force. It's unreal. And if there's one thing I can get my students to understand, if they understand that, they'll understand a lot. It's like when we talk about like the American dream and isn't America amazing? It's great because it's both the proof that the American dream is a lie, that all these people were pushed here and neglected, which I'll talk about in a second. But then also it's a proof that it's not, because people managed to, through their own excellence, figure out a way to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, which, by the way, boots were stolen from their great-great-great-grandparents. And then the next generation didn't get any boots. And then they had boots, and then those boots were taken away. So an entire generation of people who created this culture, pulling themselves up from their own bootstraps when they only had feet, which had been whipped and bloodied through walking on broken glass and burned out buildings. That's the story of hip hop, right? So that's the first class. Then the second class is going to be about the first generation of of DJs who made hip hop music before it was music, really. I'm going to be making that argument. So let's go through my PowerPoints. I apologize. That was sort of odd enunciation there. It does this every time. It doesn't allow me to share my screen the first time I try it. But here I go. All right. So here's the initial image. I'm going to be filling this first class with all these amazing photographs of the Bronx in the 70s. Great photographers took a sort of anthropological interest in the Bronx because it was such an amazing sight of rubble and just human misery. So there's a lot of these beautiful images, which I'll be sharing. And I think you can actually do a pretty interesting study of how morally ambiguous it is, these images. But I'm going to be sort of emphasizing that we're going to go from there to here, up until this first class, up until the very first hip-hop event, the foundation of hip-hop culture, August 11th, 1973, 1520 Cedric Avenue. Okay? So, did she misspell Cedric? Huh, that's funny. The main thing I'm going to be emphasizing in this class in general is social context. I've talked about this before, but it needs to be emphasized. You can't teach culture without teaching social context. You can, but there's no point. There's no point in teaching Andy Warhol without teaching the post-war consumer culture, right? But there's just no point. There's no point teaching Michelangelo without teaching Rome during the Renaissance and the papacy, right? Like there's always social context, every piece of art. There's no point in teaching anything, any kind of art any kind of culture without providing that social context. No art is made in the phantom zone, some kind of box hurtling through space with human beings raised in labs to just create art. So that's this first class. It's sort of on purpose that I'm beginning this class kind of being like, hey, before we get to the fun stuff, before we get to the hip hop, the hippie do that, we got to talk about the Bronx. And I'm going to be emphasizing a couple things. And this is for any teachers out there. You're going to notice in my slides, I use a lot of different fonts. I go to dafont.com. They have tons of free fonts. They don't sponsor me. Anything you want, like Pokemon fonts or any kind of weird movie. Matter of fact, tell me in the comments if you recognize which 1960s movie this font comes from. Cult classic. I will often sacrifice legibility for interesting images and interesting fonts. My wife does not think this is a good idea. She's smarter than me, so maybe don't listen to me. But it's a thing that I do. I really think that there's way too many boring PowerPoints. Even great teachers will use boring PowerPoints. And either don't use PowerPoints or make good ones. That makes sense? Like, I don't understand. Teachers are the smartest people on earth, yet they sacrifice like full attention on them as public speakers to have just like Calibri writing up on a blank screen. So yeah, so I just got a text. My baby's sleeping. Good news. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to really be boiling this down just to two things. Now, these two things are rather big: de-industrialization and urban planning. But with my students, as with all students right now, all students in college right now had to go to college or high school during COVID. They are all not as ready as they would have been 5 years ago. It's just a fact. So whenever I can, I try to make sure that my expectations are clear, and I'm going to tell them, you need to be able to understand and explain the following two terms: deindustrialization and urban planning. How did those things create hip hop? How do those things create the social context from which, the concrete from which the rose of hip hop is born? Poetic. So let's start with the idea of deindustrialization. Now, at this point in the class, I will have asked them to provide a definition for homework of deindustrialization. So I'll call on a student. I'm probably going to call on a student who is a little bit shy, but does the work. And I'll be able to tell that by the second class. It's crazy how quickly you can figure that out. I'll have them give the definition, describing essentially what happens when an area that was previously industrially built up is abandoned by that industry, and what happens when there are no jobs there. I teach in a school, which I do not represent. I do not represent the school I teach for, but the school that I teach at, the school where I teach, is in between Buffalo and Rochester, New York. So these kids all know about deindustrialization. Rochester, the capital of Xerox and Kodak. Okay, you can't make it up. So I'm going to be emphasizing how that existed in New York. There's this beautiful map that shows the manufacturing industries in the Bronx in 1922, where 99.3% of people were white, but 36% of people were foreign born. So this is quite interesting. Italian, Germans, Irish, okay, all living there with a population of 732,000. Okay, and we see this huge amount of industry in the Bronx. Okay, I'm going to also emphasize the nature of the baby boom that happened and the baby bust that happens as well in the 70s, and sort of talk about how the golden period after World War II, referred to as the 30 glorious years in France, started in 1945 and ended in 1975. And of course, hip hop starts right in that little moment, I'll show them just a couple graphs to show how, look at how well our GDP is doing over this time. Look at how well we are thriving as a country, how we're just making more and more money. Yet, I will show how the manufacturing jobs in New York City since World War II have been doing nothing but going down, okay? You see that, right? So what happens when manufacturing jobs leave? I'm going to be talking about them. I'm going to be talking about these immigrants who arrive in New York. Are they arriving to become Wall Street brokers? Are they arriving to become captains of industry, to become shop owners no, they are coming primarily to fill manufacturing jobs. Those are the best, most stable jobs you can get that can take you from poverty to the lower class to the middle class, eventually hopefully your children getting an education, moving into the upper class, right? That's the American dream. Those are those bootstraps I was talking about, which exist for some. So I'm going to be emphasizing this idea, and in particular as it pertains to the Bronx. So this is something that they've read for homework. This comes from, I believe, Trisha Rose. Post-industrial conditions had a profound effect on Black and Hispanic communities. Make sure they understand that. Shrinking federal funds and affordable housing. Now we'll talk about how the government itself had less money. Because the government had less money, it helped people less. It deprioritized the needs of the poor in order to save the economy. Shifts in occupational structure away from blue-collar manufacturing towards corporate and information services. I'll be talking about that. Information services. What is New York famous for? Is New York famous for factories, or is New York famous for hedge funds? Is it famous for corporate and information services? Essentially saying that the people who are well employed and making the most money in New York in these situations were those in white-collar jobs, not blue-collar jobs. And those white-collar jobs were usually behind the wall of education through a college education, which many immigrants and people of color did not have equal access to. Meant that new immigration population and the city's poorest residents paid the highest price for deindustrialization and economic restructuring, which is the truth everywhere during this period of time. They are the ones who paid the price. The poor get poorer, and service jobs replace manufacturing. This is an interesting thing, which I'm going to be talking to the students about. My classes are not explicitly political, but they are implicitly political because you can't help it. And this idea of manufacturing jobs, which are usually high-paying, often union-represented jobs, are replaced in the service sector, which are often lower paying with less stability and rarely having benefits. Okay, so this whole shift for the lower class is meaningful. This is from, I think this is from E. Woodsy's book, I believe. I don't know where this is from. Oh, I should have all these. I should have all the books. One second. I'm going to pause my recording here. How do I pause the recording? Sorry, yes. I forgot that I am also doing a series of book reviews on this channel. So I would say that this book, Breakbeats in the Bronx by E. Woodsy, is quite interesting. I thought that it was going to be pointless, because I had read Trisha Rose, and I'd read Nelson George, and I kind of figured that everything had been said. This book's particularly interesting. I'm not sure if it's like essential for a hip hop library, but it is if you want to have a very sophisticated library, because what it does is it questions a lot of the preconceived notions of what all of the stories are. It makes things a little bit more interesting. It nuances things much more. So I am very, very happy that it's here. It did a great job of describing the urban decay of the South Bronx. It really emphasized that South Bronx previously had been a home for upward mobility up until the events that I'm describing in this class today and in this video. And I don't know, it does a really, really strong job of explaining these early days. And in particular, it goes on and on about the other DJs that were working at this time in the Bronx. In New York and all the different boroughs. And I'm probably not going to go into that in the class because I don't want to get lost in the weeds. But if you want to really understand like everything that was happening in all 5 boroughs, nothing does as good of a job as this of describing what else was going on besides the South Bronx. And it does a good job of explaining sort of how the South Bronx took over and why it was so powerful. And you're going to see here, I put a little note there, MC up, B-boy down. When I get into the class on the arrival of rap, I'm going to be quoting this a lot because it does a really good job of explaining the way that hip hop culture sort of went from like DJs to dancers to graffiti, and then eventually how the MC took over everything. So anyways, that's my little book thing here. I hope I hit record. Yeah, I'm recording, right? Yeah, I'm still recording. Right? Yes, I am. But that said, I think this is from a different book. I don't remember which one. Before I teach the class, I'm going to have everything cited, but this is quite difficult. But these are just numbers which are quite useful. That South Bronx had lost 600,000 manufacturing jobs, and average income, it was half of the New York City average, 40% nationwide average, with youth employment rate at 60 to 80%. 8 in 10 young people had no jobs. This is a catastrophe. It's amazing that anything besides just murder came out of anywhere with youth unemployment that high. There's this famous moment where Gerald Ford said to New York City, drop dead. He didn't actually say drop dead. Daily News said that he said that. But what's important is he did not want to bail out New York City. He wanted to impose austerity to, okay, I'm going to pause now so Toby can stop barking. Toby. Anyway, so from the top with the president essentially imposing austerity, meaning he was not going to help New York City with money, which of course meant that more public services would be eliminated. That's sort of the Republican president. So we can all say, oh, how terrible a Republican president is. And then the Democratic senator of New York referred to his policy of benign neglect for these post-industrial conditions. Okay, that was his term, benign neglect. Planned shrinkages was another term. All these funny terms that they used. There's no such thing as benign neglect. Benign meaning harmless, neglect meaning hurtful, ignoring. Okay, but this was the idea. It was the stated policy of the government to just let the Bronx and let all of these inner city areas with concentrated poverty just suffer. That was their plan. It was not a mistake. It was not a bug. It was a feature of Democrat and Republican governments. And who suffered the most? Obviously, the poor and the people of color. So with this planned shrinkage, they laid off firemen, which they will need, and policemen. They closed schools. They closed youth centers. Okay, 80% youth unemployment. Closed schools, closed youth centers. What are the young people going to do? All right, these are the questions. These deep social service cuts are part of a larger trend in unequal wealth distribution, housing crisis into the 80s. Between 78 and 86, people in the bottom 20% of the income scale experienced an absolute decline in income, whereas the top 20% experienced most of the economic growth. Blacks and Hispanics disproportionately occupied this bottom fifth. Okay, so this is that rise of the wealth gap, which is going to be a central theme throughout my entire class. So I'm going to ask my students, why would you even stay in the South Bronx, right? Like, why would you stay in a place that's being neglected? What's wrong with these people? Why are all these Black and Hispanic people staying in the South Bronx? Why don't they move to a nice place like this? You know, look at these little houses. They can't be that much money. They should just move. Urban planning. This is the next question. I'm going to be doing a kind of joke with a lot of different people, being the father of hip hop. Robert Moses, I'm going to say, is the accidental father of hip hop. Robert Moses, who created the Cross Bronx Expressway. I'm having them read at least 2 different sections of books about the creation of the Cross Bronx Expressway so that they really understand what it is with these images. Have you ever driven on the Cross Bronx Expressway? I have. It sucks. It's terrible and it's weird and I hate it. Also, I'm from Boston, so I have to see like Yankee Stadium and go while I'm driving. I created this little line here on the slide to show what the Cross Bronx Expressway does. I'll probably emphasize a little bit the symbolism of this. I will also talk about the way that urban planning has been done for the past century disproportionately targets people who cannot advocate for themselves. So if they're going to build a highway that destroys a neighborhood, are they going to build that through the neighborhood where everybody is rich and has access to lawyers and has enough time to go and fight in the courts? Or are they going to do it where people are overworked and underpaid and disenfranchised? Where are they going to put these things? All across the country, including in the 2 cities nearby me, we see that urban planning always targets the poor, always makes them poorer, Always. It's unbelievable. So I will show this, and I will emphasize that who benefited the rich and the upper middle class because they could travel, live, and work with greater ease. It was an easier way to get around the New York area, especially from the suburbs into the city, getting over that nasty little part where all of those Black and Hispanic people are. Who left? Anybody who could. Okay, 50% of the white population left. As we read, the South Bronx was initially a largely white and Jewish area, like both, and most of that population left because they could. And other people who'd been displaced for other reasons and new immigrants ended up filling in there because they could, because who wanted to live in this renovated, torn up area of the South Bronx? So that radically changed it. At the same time, Robert Moses came up with the idea of a tower in a park. That was just his words for high-rise public housing, which we also call projects. But his idea, tower in a park, makes it sound much nicer. No, a tower in a park. Although those parks, as we will see, are instrumental in the creating of hip-hop itself. There's also this other thing that I read about, and this was in, I believe, E. Woodsy's book, where he talked about the difficulty of rent stabilizing. So that means that you can't raise the rent, which sounds good. So that means poor people can't be priced out, right? No. Because what happened was, during this time, the number of people living in high poverty areas grew by 69%. Okay. So that meant that there was more people living in poorer areas. Okay. It's not just that there were more poorer areas, it's that there were more people living in those areas. Something called a concentration effect, which sociology teachers can teach you about. I can't really teach you about. But the idea is that when there's more people living together, it ends up being exponential. The problems of crime and homelessness and unemployment tends to multiply with this concentration effect. What happened was, when they stabilized the rent, the landlords who owned these areas could no longer profit from the buildings, so they didn't maintain them. Or they just burn them to the ground because they could, because, hey, they get the insurance money. That is why there were so many fires. Now, I'm going to ask my class, I'm probably going to make this more interactive for them. I'm going to say, why were there so many fires in the Bronx? Probably going to give them like a minute, because this early in the class, they're not going to be like ready to like talk a lot. I'm going to show this graph of, look at this. Look at the South Bronx. Housing units lost to fire in 1970 and 1980. These areas, 81 to 100% of the housing units were lost to fire. Okay. Unbelievable. 30,000 fires in 4 years. Okay. And really, the source of all this is this increased poverty plus stabilizing of land, plus the fact that the land wasn't worth much because of the Cross Bronx Expressway, plus because the Cross Bronx Expressway, more poor people live there, and the people there were poorer, which made it less valuable. There's all these combining effects, which is why during the 1970s, when people wanted to just say poor, when they just wanted to say dangerous, they just said the South Bronx. That's just what they said. At this point, I'm going to ask my students again, why would you stay there? Why wouldn't you move to some place like Levittown? It's up there in Long Island. There's lots of space in Long Island, Nassau County. Look at that. It's all nice. Like, look at these little tiny houses, You could buy these houses in 1945 for $7,000, $7,000. Okay, they don't have basements, but still, interesting small houses. Why didn't the Black and Hispanic people move there? I mean, why were they even in the South Bronx in the first place? Like, it's their choice to live in those places, right? They could have moved to nicer places. Could they have not? Of course, at this point, I'm going to show them the lease that was given, and this was expressly for GIs, expressly for veterans who came back from the war, and they were given money by the government to start their homes, and this is the source of the American dream. These are the people who could pull up their bootstraps and be the greatest generation and live and make money and let their kids and their grandkids go to school, and you, sitting in my class, If you are in this class, there's a good chance that you have a grandparent or a great-grandparent who went to World War II and came home and was given tons of money from the government to start their life. Unless you're Black, in which case you didn't get that money. You were forbidden. Nobody who was Black could buy a house in Levittown. That's what it says here. Only members of the Caucasian race. You couldn't be Hispanic. You couldn't be Asian. This was repeated over and over again, and I want to make sure that my students understand the nature of redlining throughout this entire class. We're going to be talking about geography because the social context of hip-hop is the social context of redlining. It is the redlining that created these concentrated areas of poverty that put all of these people in these contexts that they could not escape from. This generational wealth, that same house that was bought for $7,000 in 1948 is currently for sale for $489,000. That family that bought that money has been able to not only live there, but accrue that much wealth over many generations. And all across the country, all of that wealth has been denied for people of color. So why didn't they leave the Bronx? Because they literally couldn't. This was their landscape. This was where they had to live. Here and here and here and here. 1520 Sedgwick Avenue. Oh, she didn't misspell Sedgwick. I misspelled Sedgwick. Here in the South Bronx, just a block away from the Cross Bronx Expressway. You see the 95 there? That's the Cross Bronx Expressway. That's where the first ever hip hop show was held. That's how we get to this point. Those are all of the social factors, the deindustrialization, the loss of manufacturing jobs, the racist urban planning, the concentration of poverty, all led to this one burned out, impoverished, unemployed place. And this is where this party is going to create hip hop. So that's the end of my first class. Okay? Pretty cool, right? So yeah, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to show you the second class too. Okay? So that's going to be my first class on this. One second. Where is PowerPoint? Open recent. Herc Bam Flash. Okay. So I am going. Wait. Oh, what's going on here? Sorry. You know me. You're having fun watching me fuddle through here. So my next class is going to be about this early stage of hip hop before rap. I think I might call this class hip hop before rap. The idea of what there was before it was commercially available, with this nice image of 1520 Sedgwick. I'm going to conclude with South Bronx, talk about DJ Kool Herc and Cindy Campbell, talk about the merry-go-round technique, Grandmaster Flash, looping and scratching, and Afrika Bambaataa, the three fathers of hip-hop. I might start off with this video, Bronx is Burning. I'll include a link in the description that was made in the 70s about the Bronx. The thing is, everyone knew what was happening in the Bronx, okay? Like Bill Moyers would go there and Jimmy Carter would go there when he was president. Everyone knew, like, what's happening in this place? Why is everything so terrible in the South Bronx? But at the same time that everyone was sitting here making these documentaries about, oh, how terrible it is, this art was brewing and was being created. It's an amazing story. I'm going to share this story from Cindy Campbell, DJ Kool Herc's brother, who explains how this party started, that she just needed money for back to school. That's it. That's it. She needed money for back to school, and she knew that her brother could do a good job being a DJ. So she paid $25 to rent the room, the recreation room in Sedgwick Avenue. And from that was created a multi-billion-dollar industry. Right there, that's the famous flyer, 25 cents for ladies, 50 cents for fellas. And then we get to DJ Kool Herc, the father of hip hop. Now, I really like this book. I think E. Woodsy's take on DJ Kool Herc is the most interesting. I think the most honest as well. Really emphasizing that what he did was he made DJs cool. Like before that, like DJs were kind of lame and made fun of and like picked on, but like he's like a big dude, he was like a cool guy. So like this was essential. Like not only did he have the sonic invention of hip hop, which is necessary, but also just his presence, just being a 6'5" dude who was just badass and cool, actually was a part of the difference, part of what made this whole thing work. Here's my description. There's the Calibri font. Make sure it's nice and clear. Born in Kingston, Jamaica, immersed in the sound system culture as a child, which I'll describe in a second. Moved to the Bronx at age 12. Brought the sound system to the Bronx on August 11th, 1973, and popularized the break. So I'm going to explain the Jamaican sound system there. There's a nice picture that I found somewhere on the internet of the Jamaican sound system, which are large parties that go back to the 40s and 50s, I believe, in Jamaica, a long, long time ago. Very loud music with huge speakers. The DJ is called a selector, and the selectors replaced live bands, partially. Right? So these big parties wouldn't have live bands, they'd have DJs. These DJs, these selectors, would become like cool guy local celebrities, as DJ Kool Herc would be. Good selectors became stars, and some people spoke on the mic. Confusingly, the people who spoke on mic were called DJs. We'll get to that later. But look at what this means, okay? That when DJ Kool Herc shows up with these big speakers, right? These are his actual speakers, and he starts doing this Jamaican thing, people react to it. They react to it because of the way that he does it, which I'll get to in a second. Side note, recently at Christie's, these were auctioned. Would you like to guess how much they sold for? $200,000. So I'm going to be emphasizing here that the history of hip hop is the history of Caribbean immigration. Without Caribbean immigrants, hip hop would not exist. Okay? It is one of the most important things I try to do on my channel is emphasize the importance and the value of immigration. I don't just mean the human value of helping people who need help. That's the real value. The basic human decency of a lenient immigration policy is the only reason you need. That's it. But if you want to go further than that, how does it benefit the country that has the immigrants arrive to them? Oh, I don't know. How about we create this form of music that will literally project American power and cultural cool for the next half century? How about that? How about the fact that all over the world, everybody wants to be a rap superstar? And it's all because DJ Kool Herc brought stuff from Jamaica into the Bronx, despite the poverty, despite the cruelty. One second, my wife just asked me a question. I need to answer her. So I'm going to pause the recording again. So I also want to say that Andre Sirois has, I just happened to find just 2 days ago or a week ago, he created a class on hip hop, which is very good. He's also a very good DJ himself at University of Oregon. And if you're interested in this kind of stuff, like how to have a hip hop class, he put up his syllabus, he put up his lesson plans, he put up his reading. He put up scans of books that I won't put up because I don't want to get in trouble with copyright stuff. But he did a great job. And our classes are going to be very, very different. But he did point me in the direction of certain things, such as Ed Piscor's excellent comic strip, The Family Tree of Hip Hop. Right. So just great images, right? This image of DJ Kool Herc, and in particular, this idea of what DJ Kool Herc understood. And this is emphasized by E. Woodsy as well. A DJ's job is to make the audience happy, is to make them react, okay? And he understood that what people liked the most was the break, the drum solo, or the funkiest part of a song. He understood that. He understood that in a way that no other DJ did. So he goofed around and figured it out, and he created the merry-go-round. So I'm going to be introducing a part here. Eric B. and Rakim have a great album called Don't Sweat the Technique. I'm going to be introducing a bit here called Sweat the Technique, where I'm going to explain the techniques. I'm going to explain from Beat This, a hip hop history, a 1984 BBC documentary, where you see DJ Kool Herc demonstrating the merry-go-round technique. I'm not going to do it here because I don't want to get copyright struck, but it's a great video. I'll include a link to that in the description as well. Essentially, he just would have multiple records and he would know where the break was in the song, and he would switch between one to the other. Forget melody, chorus, songs. It was all about the groove, building it and keeping it going. It was all about the groove. That was it. Not about melody, chorus, or songs, but about the groove. This is why he created hip hop. It was understanding the rhythm and the power of the rhythm, isolated, repeated rhythm as a basis for dancing, as a basis for rhyming. This was what he discovered. This is why he is the father of hip hop. He doesn't have any recordings that are worth listening to. He is not an amazing musical artist, but he is an innovator and he is a founder of this whole thing, because he knew, I got to do what these people in front of me want me to do. And they want me, no one else figured this out. They want me to just repeat this cool part, repeat this cool drum beat. So I'm going to do it. More than that, though, part of the reason why he's so good is because he would pick different, because he picked music that they reacted to. So as you read, or as my students will have read, he started off playing reggae songs and no one wanted to hear it. So then he went to R&B songs. And this is the thing that Woodsy talks about that's so great, is that it's actually kind of a generational thing. He's like playing James Brown. And already at this point in the 70s, that was like the music of everyone's parents. But by taking old music and just taking the cool parts of it, it created a sort of transgenerational connection. And the funk beats, the funk breaks, that was the coolest part of that music, and that was the basis of hip-hop, where everyone else was playing either disco or kind of soft rock or kind of sweet soul music. He realized how to take this. That is the other essential thing that he did. And in particular, the first three songs that he took, the break of and put together in the merry-go-round are all three important for different reasons, okay? James Brown, Give It Up or Turn It Loose. James Brown would end up being the most sampled person in hip-hop history for his different drum breaks, as played by Clyde Stubblefield, probably like the most heard drummer of all time, probably even more than Ringo, now that I think about it. And then how he also dug in the crates for something like the incredible bongo band's Apache Rock, which no one ever heard before, but became a staple. And then how he even went totally left field and found this weird hard rock band, Babe Ruth, out of England with their song, The Mexican. Now in class, I'm going to do a YouTube merry-go-round. I'm going to have all three videos lined up at the break, and I'm going to play one into the other. And it's going to sound kind of bad on purpose. It's going to sound kind of bad on purpose because I'm going to show that what Kool Herc did was he figured out that everyone wants the breaks, how to find the breaks and put them together. But he didn't do it smoothly. He didn't have to. He was making lots of money and getting lots of adulation, and he was super duper cool. I'm going to ask a question of my class: is this making music? To which I'm going to say no. I'm not even going to say this is making music. That's why hip hop is so interesting, why rap is interesting, because rap takes this thing of manipulating music, of being a DJ, and turns it into recontextualizing music and making new music. But I don't know. This is a long debate. Okay, we'd have to wait for Grandmaster Flash, the father of hip hop, who came from the Barbados, and his parents came from Barbados. So to show again the Caribbean influence on hip hop, and show that he would be the person who would smooth it out because he had a scientific mind, because he is musically curious. I'm going to show a section from the Netflix show. The History of Hip Hop show that they have, which is really quite good, where he explains what he did, how he merges technique and technology and develops the art, along with Grand Wizard Theodore, who was his friend's little brother. Grand Wizard Theodore is the guy who invented the scratching. And so this is going to be my Sweat the Technique, where we're going to discuss the difference between, and they will have watched a video. I'm going to make them watch this video where Grandmaster Flash essentially calls out DJ Kool Herc as not being the inventor of looping, right? Because he wasn't. Because DJ Kool Herc didn't really loop. Like the merry-go-round wasn't smooth. But Grandmaster Flash, with his scientific mind, what he was able to do was make it smooth, make it seamless, which was the next step. This is what will lead to being a hip hop DJ, leading into becoming a rap producer. So I'll play an example song, The Adventures of Grandmaster Flash on the Wheels of Steel, which is just a great example of Grandmaster Flash's styles of going one to the next to the next. Of course, that leaves Africa Bambaataa. Family immigrated from Barbados and Jamaica. So we have one from Jamaica, one from Barbados, and then the other from Barbados and Jamaica. Again, the history of hip hop is due to immigration policy allowing these people in. And of course, racist planning, which means that they all had to be in the same bombed out poor area. I'm going to emphasize that he outlines the 4 elements of hip hop. In the first class, I'm going to have them talk about the 4 elements of hip hop. And then here I'm going to be reminding them to make sure that they always understand that hip hop is not rap music, and that he expands the kind of music in hip hop, and also how he symbolizes the decline of gang culture. Now, each of these is going to be interesting. The gang culture thing. So if you don't know, he was like a major leader in the Black Spades gang. And then he would go on to found the Zulu Nation. I'm going to be offering extra credit to my students if they want to watch this documentary, Rebel Kings, which is available through my school's library, which is all about these gangs in the Bronx in the 70s. Because in this time, there were all these gangs. Obviously, there are all these gangs. Obviously, there'd be gangs when there's this much poverty and this much, like, who is going to be the king of all this rubble, right? That's the question. Rubble. Who's going to be the Hamburglar of the Bronx, right? So that's part of what made DJ Kool Herc Africa Bambaataa so interesting was he converted the idea of a gang into a positive Zulu nation. So I'm going to be discussing this Zulu nation, this idea of essentially a gang that was in service of hip hop. That's what it was. Zulu Nation was taking the ethos of a gang, everybody all together being a part of a set, but put it towards hip hop. And then instead of having territory and money and domination, all based on the concept of peace, love, unity, and having fun. And of course, also African pride. One of my favorite things that's talked about in this book as well is the way that people are like, what the hell are you talking about? I don't want to be African. You know, like there's a long history of sort of division between African Americans and Africans, sort of mutual condescension on both sides. I mean, that happens with all immigrant groups, forced immigration or not, right? I mean, there's a contempt between Brits and English and Americans, right? It's obviously very different with Africans and African Americans, but still this sort of mutual looking down on. So the fact that he just made Africa seem cool was actually a very big deal. And when I talk about hip hop across the world, this is going to get a lot more attention in a later class. So I'm going to play the song Planet Rock. I'm going to reference how it quotes Kraftwerk and say that this is Africa Bambaataa's musical legacy is expanding what could be made into hip hop, where the breaks could come from. That the breaks could come from proto-electronic music, that everything was open. The hip hop monster could eat anything, digest it, and create something new. It could eat. That's an ugly metaphor, Sky. I'm not going to use that in the class. That's what hip hop could do. Anything was open to be turned into a break. I'll also, of course, mention the fact that he has been sued for alleged sexual abuse. I think it just needs to be mentioned because he is a great hero of hip hop, but he has a rather spotty history. And then if there's any time left over in the class, I'm just going to put on I'm going to put on Grand Wizard Theodore still does DJ sets. So I'll just kind of show him scratching in 2018 just because it's fun. Because following along with E. Woodsy's book, oops, sorry, that's for the next class. Following along with E. Woodsy's book, I'm going to be sort of following this concept of like the DJ and then the MC. And then right as I get to the MC, I'm going to take a left turn and I'm going to go to the graffiti artists and then eventually to the B-boys and then back to rap. I cannot wait to keep teaching this class. Did you find this interesting? Do you have other thoughts about how I could teach about this early time in hip hop, the prehistory of rap music? Let me know. And smash like buckets. You know, these videos are getting less and less views. I feel like people care less and less. So show me that you do. Leave a comment. Say, I care. All right. Till next time, there's the camera.